it has. And to the beginning of that sentence, again, the only country that's amended in an affirmative way its legal gender recognition framework, that also is a significant slowing on how this was going even 2 or 3 years ago, where we would see 2 or 3 countries making an affirmative amendment to legal gender recognition, and now it's really just one. If you're really in touch with this subject, you might be asking me, why did I say just one when Sweden also did this? But the map is based on when something is implemented, and the Swedish legislative change doesn't implement until July, so it didn't make the cutoff for this year. We update the map in real time as new laws get implemented, so in July it will say that Sweden has moved up, but nobody will pay attention to it until next May, and that's why Germany also made this jump this year instead of last year, because the law was passed before the map, but not implemented until November. A couple of other pieces of positive news coming out of this year's Rainbow Map. I won't go through all of these. I'll make sure that colleagues are able to share the slides so that you can dig in a bit. But the top two here, the German reform and the Austrian extension of anti-discrimination protections. What's particularly notable in both of these cases, while they are really positive, is that the government changed since they did this, and there are parties within both of the coalitions currently in power in both of these countries who campaigned to repeal the advancements that they had. So while there are gains, they might be a bit at risk, and we really need to see whether we are going to keep them. We've also seen anti-hate policies being strengthened, as well as a couple of places where we see family protected, Liechtenstein as well as Latvia, and some additional work on equality bodies. And I wanted to point at the equality bodies point because this seems to be a quite clear consequence of the Equality Bodies Directive package that came out last year in 2024. And in all three of these cases, they're getting additional points because their equality bodies have started to more systematically work on sex characteristics as a protected ground. That is the only positive movement on intersex issues that happened this year. No new legislation anywhere, and only 3 little bits of policy. So it's quite stagnant with respect to protecting the human rights of intersex people. And I'm almost done. I want to say a little bit about negative movement that is below the headlines. I've already talked about the top 3, but we've seen also an anti-propaganda bill in Bulgaria, and there is more on the horizon in Bulgaria. Slovakia, we've seen restrictions on freedom of assembly, and there's also significantly more on the horizon, very negative constitutional amendments that are in process potentially in Slovakia. The Republic of Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, removing gender identity from hate crime protection. Belarus also with an anti-propaganda law, and Greece and Montenegro failing to effectively implement their national action plans. What is also quite starkly negative and is missing from the map because of the things that we do measure are one, the myriad draft laws that have hit the table in recent months, and such as the Latvian, Albanian, and Slovakian efforts to define sex in their legislative frameworks, generally in their constitutions, as sex assigned at birth, essentially making legal gender recognition impossible, as well as attacks on trans-specific healthcare. Trans-specific healthcare often is not linked to a policy, and certainly not to a law, so it's impossible for us to capture, but it's something that really needs to be mentioned in this moment. And as I mentioned before, the failure to advance on protections for intersex people in this context. We've already talked about the headlines, so I think I'll actually skip in purpose of time and just take you to my QR code, because I know we'll continue the conversation. Thanks very much for your attention.
Is this on? Yes. Thank you so much, Keenan, for this presentation. And yeah, I hope, I think we can leave the QR code there just a little bit longer so that anyone who wants to scan it can scan it. And I would invite my other 2 speakers to please join us in the purple chairs. Thank you. So that's not an act of God. That's my colleague Kezia. Thank you. I think this is perfect, not too bright. Okay, thank you so much. So once again, a very warm welcome also from me to this very special event. Well, why is it special? There are a number of international days. I once looked at the calendar. Everything has an international day these days, which is cool. Everyone can find their favorite international days in the calendar. But to us, it's important because in the current political climate, a lot of organizations are taking a step back. They're falling in line, trying not to rock the boat, and they don't do events on LGBTIQ rights anymore, or some other non-discrimination issue, just to sort of follow the lead of the mainstream. But we are not like that, or I would like to believe that we are not like that. So we are here today because we believe that the principles and the values that we actually believe in, that we claim to believe in, are not contingent upon the political climate, that we continue to stand up for them no matter what is happening on the outside. So you may ask, okay, but what are these values? Well, we believe in fundamental rights, the rule of law and democracy, and that everybody, irrespective of gender identity, sexual orientation, skin color, religion, deserve to live a life free of persecution and with love and with respect and dignity. That shouldn't be controversial, but sadly it is. So what I just wanted to say, and before we get into the conversation, is that it's important to continue to say these things, to continue to stand up and say that these are fundamental rights and nobody deserves to be discriminated against for something that they were born with, that they can't help. And for everyone in this audience who is personally impacted by some of the backlash, we are with you. So with that said, I'm gonna also take a seat and give you a bit of an introduction. Keenan, you already met, and they are joined by Alessandro Maccia, who is a researcher and lecturer at the University of Maastricht and also the author of a very cool newsletter on EU LGBTIQ rights. I hope I got the name correct. You should sign up, it's great. And we also are very happy to welcome Esther Martinez, the director and founder of Reclaim, a civil society organization. Welcome, and let's get started. So this panel is going to be structured in 4 clusters. The first one is going to be just a bit of further discussion on the rainbow map. I hope you all got to scan the QR code. And then we will get into some more details on, into the rule of law and the backlash against the EI and just generally the future of the EU when it comes to fundamental rights and non-discrimination. So let's get to it. Okay, so we have seen the presentation. You all know the context by now. So my first question is, of course, to you, Keenan. How difficult was it this year to kind of coordinate this enormous work and data collection against the background that civic spaces are shrinking across Europe, across the world, and there are political attacks on NGOs, and your work is getting harder and harder to do. So how did it come about?
Yeah, it's getting more complicated, and absolutely. And so part of the way that I mentioned that there are more than 200 country experts who are involved in this process. That comes from a list of 400 to 500 individuals that we reach out to every year. We offer compensation for their participation in the process, but this year, many more than usual emails bounced, where organizations have shuttered or people have had to leave the sort of paid role that they were in, or move into a more volunteer position, or where just being associated with the organization, not associated with funding, but associated with political attacks, means that that people are not able to participate for fear of their safety and security. All of these things sort of coalesce into a more complicated process, both for us to extract data that reflects the reality on the ground and represents that the reality on the ground is becoming radically more compressed, with people having much less time and energy to put into a project that we know is important to them because they tell us, but they're not able to participate.
Okay, thank you. But thankfully, ILGA is not the only organization, and your partners are not the only organization that continue doing this critical work. One of the other such organizations is Reclaim, and I know that Esther, you and your team have been following closely some of the countries in the EU. Can you give us, like, very briefly, an overview of some of the violations of EU law that you have tracked over the past year?
I think we can categorize the kind of attacks that we are seeing. So basically, governments and authoritarian leaders are copying one another. Very unfortunately, they are not very creative in the attacks. So what we are seeing is restrictions on legal gender recognition and continuous attacks on the rights of trans people. We are seeing more and more attacks against comprehensive sex education. It is happening both in Eastern and Western European alike. And it's very, very intense to the extent that organizations such as Eurochild are internally also looking at how they can push back against these trends. We are seeing propaganda laws also being spreading. Propaganda laws basically mean censorship of content being in advertisement, in media, and in trade, actually, like goods and services. We are seeing still restrictions on the rights of rainbow families as well. And the lack of implementation of rulings. So basically there is a huge rule of law problem when it comes to the implementation of CEU rulings protecting the rights of LGBTIQ people in general. So that breaches a number of EU law legislation, from GDPR to the Audiovisual Directive to the e-commerce. The problem is not to identify an EU law violation. The problem is getting the European institutions to react to this EU violation. So I'm more interested normally when I'm asked this question to go back to that, to go back to the fact that the European Commission has the tools to address this attack, but they are simply not doing it through infringements. And we can have like more intensive discussion about that later.
Yeah, thank you. We're definitely gonna have that discussion. I have a whole list of issues to discuss on that. Thank you. So Alessandro, now over to you. There was one country that wasn't specifically mentioned in Keenan's presentation, but I'm curious to hear about, especially because we all know that this city is 50% Italian. So how about Italy? There has been a lot of news also about LGBTIQ topics, and I heard, because CEPS is also 50% Italian, that there could be a referendum on marriage equality if all goes well. So what's your take on Italy in the rainbow map, and what's next?
Yeah, okay, so I was about to say, you asked me because I'm Italian, but also because half of the city is Italian. I think, well, the starting point is that Italy has never really been a country that, let's say, stands in any map or index. So generally speaking, it's always been a bit of a regressive country when it comes to queer rights protection. What I think is happening now, what the government led by Giorgia Meloni is doing, is the same of Orban, but in a smarter way than Orban, in the sense that they are doing these, very small-scale targeted attacks that, if you look at them individually, nobody really gives much attention. Media do not really give attention because these are very, very targeted small legal attacks. For example, they are instructing public prosecutors to ask for, to stop recognizing same-sex parenthood, or they are attacking schools that provide gender-neutral bathrooms, for example, and many other, of these, let's say, targeted attacks. They're not, they do not really do a systemic attack all altogether, and that's why there is much less media attention, in my opinion. But the actual result is that of a systemic attack, both in the political narrative, but also in the legal tools that are concretely restricting and making the life more and more difficult to queer individuals that live in Italy. Whereas, unfortunately, I must say, the proposed referendum on so-called marriage equality, that is unfortunately a very good example of misleading information, in the sense that Italy has, since 2016, civil unions, so same-sex couples can accede to that, but they cannot accede to the traditional marriage. There are some differences, of course, between the two types of union, and this referendum would erase the different treatments that these laws have. But actually, what I think is that the 2016 law was not, I mean, it was quite progressive in a substantive way, in the sense that it's not that different from marriage. What is different and what is important is the symbolic point, no? That you provide something different for same-sex couples. And that is not being challenged by this proposal for a referendum, and simply because the Italian constitution does not allow for it. The Italian constitution allows for referendums to repeal an existing piece of legislation, but you cannot collect signatures to propose something new. That needs to come from the legislator. And so that's why, I mean, I think it's misleading to call it a referendum on marriage equality, because even if we collect the signatures, even if we go to vote and we win, we don't have actually marriage equality.
Okay, thank you. Apologies for misstating it then. Thank you for correcting it. And it's indeed very interesting then to see how it develops in the next couple of years, if maybe the Meloni government will graduate into a more structural approach, or maybe they will, I don't know, wake up one day and be more progressive. Fingers crossed. So just to wrap up the rainbow map, I'm going to turn back to Keenan. And so we were talking about Italy as a case study. You already mentioned the UK. I think it's very interesting how much the country had dropped in a single year. But there is another example, Austria, that was mentioned in one of your slides. I made a bit of progress, but reading the rainbow map, I recall that it's a very fragile progress. So we don't know if it's going to stick or not. So can you just, in your own opinion, give us a prognosis for both of those countries? What do you expect to see from them in a year's time?
For the UK and
UK and Austria.
I'll start with Austria. I think that's an easier one. While one of the coalition members did actively campaign on repealing the expanded anti-discrimination protections, that hasn't come up much since the coalition was in place. So it's very possible that the rest of the coalition has kind of pulled this coalition party into line, and it will die on the vine. We really need to sort of wait and see. I think that if the coalition gets into trouble, we are more likely to see this issue come back up than if the coalition is able to sort of go ahead with its agreed agenda. And that, it's one of those issues that can motivate people to get back out to the polls in a snap election in favor of far-right parties, is attacks on LGBTI people. So I think the only moment that we might see this start to come back up is if the coalition is teetering, or if it falls. The UK is a different conversation, of course. The first past the post and Labour Tories and all of that, the very sort of limited impact that the Liberal Dems have, means that it's not a coalition conversation. It's a governing party or nothing. And plus the sort of wrinkle that the Lords brings into the entire conversation. A wrinkle is really understatement of the consequences of the Lords on LGBTI issues. Last week, or earlier this week, the Lords passed a resolution that would take the Supreme Court's judgment's definition of sex and apply it across the entire legal framework in the UK. The government has not responded, as far as I've seen, to that adoption in the Lords, and it would also need to go to Parliament. So it's still sort of sitting there, but there's clearly one body in the UK lawmaking system that is perfectly happy to keep going in a quite negative direction. And part of the logic that went into deciding to take the points away from the UK was the government's reaction to the Supreme Court decision and to the interim update provided by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which actually expanded the impact of the Supreme Court's definition change to other parts of the sort of everyday life. So the government, there is an opportunity here, right? The Supreme Court has said, we understand the definition of the Equalities Act to be, and all the government needs to do to change that is to update the Equalities Act with a clear definition based on what was in all of the legislative development notes that clearly indicated that the definition that the Supreme Court provided is not what was intended by lawmakers. The government needs to do that. It's possible to turn this around easily, but what the government's reaction so far has been is to welcome the judgment and to welcome the interim update from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And so I don't have a whole lot of hope that the government will take such a bold step towards rectifying the situation, the sort of gap in definitions that the initial Equality Act provided. There is, however, a complex situation in that the Supreme Court decision has made it so that the Equalities Act violates the Gender Recognition Act and creates legal incontinuity that needs to be solved. And how that gets solved, I think, is the key question. There are several legal challenges already in place in the UK. The government has not taken a stance yet as to how they'll react to them, if they'll defend the Supreme Court decision or not. But I think we're very likely to see something get to the European Court of Human Rights in the coming couple of years. That's a process that takes time, so who knows how quickly that'll happen. If it'll impact our next map, I would imagine not. I think they were quite shocked by our decision to take the points away based on my engagement with the UK government around this time. I think that they are trying to put forward the argument that this is a minor issue and doesn't have real sort of larger impacts. And for me, that feels a bit wool over the eyes of the public discourse that's happening in the UK and how virulently anti-trans it is, as well as how fragile human rights protections really are when all it really takes is to change a couple of words and robust protections can easily fall. So yeah, I don't have a strong positive feeling about the UK. Austria, I think we might be all right as long as there's not a different political problem that comes forward.
Okay, so I'm going to take that little bit of hope you offered and just run with it. Indeed, but the issue seems to be that there is just a general broad sentiment that with the rise of the far right, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, I'm sure you have all in your communities, there's this political movement that seeks to make LGBTIQ people, especially trans people, a topic of conversation in the context that there is a common enemy that we have to somehow fight against because, I don't know, child protection or keeping female sports, women's sports intact. And then these conversations are used to justify exclusion and the villainization of an entire community. And then essentially also marginalization of an entire societal group. So with that, we would get into the second cluster, which is on the rule of law. And my first question will be to Esther, a very broad question. So what is the connection between anti-LGBTQ sentiments, including the villainization of transgender people, and the rule of law? So does the backlash indicate that there is a persistent rule of law backsliding in Europe?
Oh, absolutely. If you see the countries that are backsliding, and then you correspond it to countries with huge levels of corruption, the link is there. I'm giving you a very concrete example. When in Romania some years back, the Prime Minister wanted to legalize corruption in order not to end up himself in jail, what the party did was a referendum against same-sex marriage. That's an example. When Hungary comes under pressure from institutions because of the graft and corruption, and the European Union starts acting, then they go check the polls. What is that they can rally my base? Is anti-LGBTQ hate. Let's go for it. Bulgaria, same story. So definitely there is that level of correspondence. And then there is another layer to that, that it is that all these countries, when they are challenged in court in the CEU and they lost their cases, they never actually implement the rulings that are meant to protect LGBTQ people. And that's a huge rule of law problem. So just to give you a stat, member states are actually not good at implementing CEU rulings related to values. And the Commission is not good at going after them, trying to get sanctions for that. So we have calculated that it's around 50% of the judgments that are actually implemented. But take Bulgaria, and that percentage drops to 16.8%. They are not implementing rulings. So it's a huge, huge problem from a rule of law perspective that it is not addressed sufficiently. So definitely that type of correlation is there. So it's both the LGBTQ people a scapegoat to hide corruption in many, many cases, or other problems in the country. And then there is the issue of these countries actually having huge rule of law problems back at home.
Okay, so what we learned from this is that it's not only the courts that kind of safeguard the rule of law, but there's also civil society organizations like yours who help in these cases and support the implementation of judgments. So, which brings me to the question that I wanted to ask first, Keenan. So with these increased political movements trying to restrict civic space and the funding of civil society organizations, not just in the member states, but also at the European level, like in the EPP, a supposedly moderate centrist party, there have been movements to kind of restrict or scrutinize NGO funding. So how can civil society organizations support these ongoing legal cases or any advocacy work standing up for LGBTIQ individuals when their entire livelihood is at risk?
Maybe to make a couple of sort of tangential points on that. One of them is funding strategic litigation is almost impossible. And the Commission gave us a strategic litigation grant 2 years ago and didn't renew us in the second cycle, which is also a bit of a telling piece about the very, very limited money that is available is not being used by the donors that are doing the work to create continuity on subjects, but instead sort of moving things around. And that means a failure to build capacity over the long term to engage with litigation processes. So there's a massive gap. We have one person on our team who is a sort of full-time permanent contract litigation person, and that has the most difficult role to fund every year. It's extremely difficult to fund. And none of the other LGBTI organizations have a staff member working on this issue who is funded to do strategic litigation. It's all coming out of other pockets of money as a bit of a shift around. The sort of other piece there is about there's not only an issue with shrinking access to resources, with shrinking access to spaces. I mean, I don't know how recently you've been into the European Parliament with a lobbyist badge, but now it takes an extra 5 minutes just to enter the building because of these new restrictions on our ability to access what should be the public's space, the Europeans' space. But there's also what we're clearly seeing at this global level, a shaking of the bedrock of the international order. International law is being challenged not just in the human rights framework. Contracts are being broken with no consequences, withdrawal from treaties with no consequences, or just violation of treaties to which one is a part. And all of this has not, in concert with changing frameworks at the national level, also changing frameworks at the regional and international level, means that civil society, who have spent years or decades capacitating themselves to work at these levels, no longer know the rules because there are no rules, or the rules are changing on a day-to-day basis. And so the task of a civil society organization or actor is also changing. You've learned how XYZ piece of international law works and have been working with it for a decade, and now it's gone, or it's only there for certain countries and not really there for anybody else. I mean, a very concrete example that fits with our conversation about Hungary is Hungary withdrawing from the ICC so that they could bring Netanyahu in for a country visit. And that slipperiness of international agreements will continue to make the role of civil society all the more complicated. And when you couple that with the radical decrease in access to funding for LGBTI civil society, what we will see is a very different movement 6 months from now, a year from now, than we've seen over the last 5 or 10 years, where governments were happy to support their national organizations. Some European governments, for whom the legislative framework allows, also happy to put money into European organizations in other European countries or regional organizations, though actually that's illegal in most European countries, which I think is interesting. They're allowed to fund their own organizations and development funding, but it's actually quite difficult to fund outside of your own country in Europe. And so the resources are going away, and the tasks that we need to do are changing. That means that we're going to see something that looks really different. And I think it's too early to tell exactly what that's going to look like or the consequences that it'll have for effective and successful advocacy.
Okay, I feel like I keep asking you like questions of a fortune teller, like kind of asking you to what's going to happen in 1 year, what's going to happen in 2 years. I know it's hard to forecast, and things are changing every day. But Esther, do you want to add something to this? Because I know that Reclaim works also in supporting litigation and advocacy.
Yes, we have the same concerns as Ilga. Right now, it's a very difficult moment in which actually the entire aid infrastructure, as we used to know it, has collapsed. So it's a very scary moment, not just for NGOs, but actually for rights. The NGO sector was relying on a number, also handful of philanthropies that have scaled back. And that, coupled with what is happening in the United States, is making things very difficult. So what we are seeing right at this moment is that governments and far-right parties understand this very well. So the attacks have multiplied tenfold when it comes to anti-LGBTIQ initiatives, but also initiatives to close down NGOs entirely, as it is in the case of Hungary just a couple of days ago. And we will have also the opportunity to discuss that. But it is definitely a concern. And my hope is that the European Union at some point reflects on this and the importance of actually making sure that we invest properly in this arena, or we will find out that we have several Moscows within the European Union itself.
Okay, I'll take that last sentence for the next round. But before that, Alessandro, I haven't forgotten about you. So we talked about civil society and government institutions when it comes to the correlation between backlash against DEI and the rule of law. What about the private sector would be my question. Because, I mean, it's gonna be June soon, which is Pride Month. In Belgium, of course, we start earlier, but a lot of companies have done their advertisements and they changed their logos to a rainbow, which we also did, by the way. There are stickers all around, but we're not a company. And now there is a lot of companies, especially tech companies, who kind of walk back their support for not just the LGBTIQ community, but diversity, inclusion in general. So what do you think about the companies who still do it? Is it pinkwashing still if a company changes their logo for Pride Month and does little commercials with gay couples and then just forgets about it for the next 11 months? Or does it mean something else now when they continue to do it in the face of backlash?
Okay, so on this question, I do not claim expertise. I'm gonna just share my opinion. So, I mean, it's an obvious statement. We are a capitalist society. Big companies and companies play a very big role in how our society progresses, or the opposite. I do think that most of the companies that did start joining prides, putting their, the rainbow logo on social media, and sometimes, yeah, also providing diversity, equality, and inclusion policies internally, they did that not most of the times because they really cared, but because it is economically convenient. And there is a very nice book about that that is titled The Economic Case of LGBTI Equality, which showcases how, discriminating against the LGBTIQ plus community, but any minority is, you're missing a lot of money that you could make. So I do think that there is always another interest behind. Of course, I am glad, as you were saying in the introduction, that it is important also, especially in these times, to keep on talking about the topic, organizing events, talking about diversity, equality, inclusion, and keeping up the attention on the topic. But then I don't think that we can rely on the choice of big companies to support or not to support diversity, equality, and inclusion. And I would add on that the same applies to political institutions. And I'm gonna say that, then if someone wants to complain in the Q&A, I'm gonna take it. I am very, very disappointed of the choice of Brussels Pride to invite the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, who is the greatest example of political marketing that Europe has ever seen, from a committed anti-abortion and anti-LGBTIQ plus right politician. She suddenly became the voice of equality and the union of equality. And also, I've been told yesterday, I didn't know it before, to be honest, that 3 or 4 commissioners have been invited to join Brussels Pride, and I don't think we should do that. I don't think we should we should check less right now, just because it's a time in which LGBTIQ plus rights are under attack, and so we should stop asking for an actual commitment and showcase rainbow washing. No, I think we should do the opposite. So we shouldn't invite politicians, and we shouldn't allow big companies at Prides, for example, when they are not really committed to work on that, other than the logo on social media with the rainbow that is, or the commissioner for equality this morning that posted a very nice video, with the progressive flag in front of the European Commission, but then they are missing all the possibilities they have to, actually defend LGBTIQ plus rights. And for the institutions, I think it's even worse, because, the the big company, it's a choice. The institution, it's their job, and they are paid with the taxpayers' money to do that.
Okay, so thank you for name dropping Roberta Metsola, because I mean, isn't she Maltese? So that must mean that she is super progressive. No, I'm joking. But the EP president can then indeed lead us to the next topic, which is the EU, because we talked a lot now about member states and other countries outside of the EU. But let's maybe talk about the EU for a second, and for a second I mean like 20 minutes. So there have been generally at the EU level less infringement proceedings. That's a fact. The EU publishes them the Commission publishes them on their own website. But there have been some high-profile cases, like the Commission versus Hungary, that's still ongoing. Judgment is expected this year about the child protection law. And then the Commission is also gearing up to get into a fist fight with some tech companies over the DSA and compliance with some content moderation and disinformation rules. So there are things happening, there are other things that are not happening. So the question first is then maybe about the case of Commission versus Hungary. And Esther, what do you think about this outcome, about the possible outcome of this case? So what do you think the court will decide? And I'm especially interested to hear your thoughts whether the court can find a standalone violation of Article 2 values by the Hungarian government.
So for those not familiar with the case, this was a case that the European Commission initiated against Hungary back in 2021. It only reached the court much later. Von der Leyen was actually dragging the whole process. It took member states' involvement, like high level of involvement, for her to actually move the case into the court. And then after that, 16 member states joined in the case after very intense campaign by Reclaim and other organizations, including like all the LGBTIQ organizations in Hungary. So it is a landmark case. It's a landmark case for a variety of reasons. It's a landmark case because it's the first time the Article 2 is being put forward as a standalone pleading. It's a landmark case because the number of member states that participated, and that meant that the court decided to give it a lot of prominence with all 27 judges. They are going to rule on it. It's something that only happens in 0.1% of the cases. The hearing was last November. I always like to look at the faces of the judges to try to see what is that they might be thinking. I think it was interesting. I think the level of frustration is palpable. I think it's very likely that Hungary is being found to have violated Article 2. All member states that participated supported the European Commission pleading in that sense. So it doesn't, I don't think the court thinks is overreach in terms of what it can conclude. What I think it's interesting is that what is going to happen then when the court says Hungary has violated Article 2, how member states will react to that, because it's going to be very hard for member states to say, well, we are actually still exploring if Hungary is at risk of violating Article 2, which is the status quo at the moment, when the courts will have concluded that it is. So how also the Denmark presidency will react to that, and whether the frustration of member states also in relation to the ban on pride and now the new legislation that effectively is trying to kill off the entire sector will boil over into an actual vote on Article 7. And I think there are a lot of conversations going on in that direction as we speak, actually.
Okay, just to then stay in Luxembourg for a second. Alessandro, what do you think about possible court action against Hungary because of the Pride ban that was enacted a couple of weeks ago? Do you think it's going to happen?
No. I mean, I would like to, but we are, well, first of all, we are running out of time if we wanted an interim measure to ask Hungary to suspend the effects of the law until the judgment. And on that, you go on the Reclaim website. There is a very nice timeline, and we are already, at the end of the timeline, and the Commission did not even communicate the intention to, so I don't think this will happen. So the most problematic aspect of the ban on Budapest Pride for EU law is, first of all, the fact that there's not only a sanction if you will participate to Pride, but there is the law passed also gives police authorities the much more powers to use AI tools to identify participants, and this is forbidden by the EU AI Act, which is the only, just to say something good about the EU sometimes, this is the only legal framework in the world that regulates AI, so there's not another example in the world, and the EU AI Act, well, first it contains a non-discrimination clause, so it cannot be used to discriminate on sexual orientation or gender identity, ethnic origin, etc., etc. Second, it prohibits the use of AI to identify people in public spaces unless there is a very, very strong reason for public security and judicial oversight. Both of them are not there because, I mean, Pride is not a risk for public security. It's never been. And also we know, I mean, Esther explained that very well, that judicial oversight in Hungary is not really the thing working best. So, I mean, and then there is, of course, the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, the right to assembly, the principle of non-discrimination, and all these fundamental rights provisions that, of course, are breached by the Pride ban. So I think that there would be all the elements for a court case if someone wanted to do a court case, but I don't think they will do that. But the Commission gave, anyways, a very strong answer. They published a social media post, both on X, Instagram, Facebook, like all the platforms have been covered, where they said, we are a union of equality, and we support the LGBTIQ plus community. Today they put the flags everywhere, and voila.
No, that's going to change everything. Huh? Okay, so you mentioned we should say nice things about the EU, and I mean, there must be something. What about the LGBTIQ strategy of the Commission, Keenan? What do you think about the one that's currently expiring this year? And what do you expect from the upcoming new one? Is ILGA being consulted on this, for example? Because I know the Commission likes to do its consultations with also civil society. So what do you know about this?
Do you only want positive comments? That sounded like the framing of
No,
the
no,
question.
don't censor
Okay.
yourself. This
Okay.
is a free space.
Yeah. Maybe start with the previous one. It was our assessment that, for the most part, the Commission was able to check the boxes that it created for itself with the previous strategy. Not all of them, and certainly not some of the ones that we consider to be the most important. But on the whole, the boxes were checked, but in a large number of cases, that checking was no more than checking. So as a very concrete example, the Commission committed to do work on access to employment for trans and intersex people in the EU. And the way that they checked that box was one 50-minute session in the LGBTI subgroup in November 2021, where 2 member states presented good practice. That's it. And the box was checked, and they never visited it again. Not once did trans and intersex employment come up again. So the boxes are being checked, but it's not being done in good faith. And I would say that we have a clear set of demands for the next strategy, but the ability of the Commission, one, to get full Commission support when it starts to go through that sort of cross-Commission, cross-college consultation phase, we think is extremely low. It's a very anti-LGBTI college in general, and so we don't have high hopes at that level. We also don't have high hopes in terms of cross-DG collaboration. The previous strategy had some commitments outside of DG Just. We expect that to go down with this commission. And we also are quite concerned about how concerned the services seem to be about the breadth and depth of the next strategy. So we don't have, we're not extremely optimistic about what the next strategy will bring. And in the current climate, with the quite clear failure of the Commission to react to active attacks on LGBTI people in violation of EU law or potentially in violation of EU law, the strategy feels a bit performative in the same way that the social media posts do to create a strategy in a moment like this when you don't react in a meaningful way to a pride ban within the EU is quite ridiculous, let alone to say that there's been no reaction whatsoever on Bulgaria from the Commission. We've had this one bit of action from the Commission on Hungary, but what about Bulgaria? That's quite disappointing, and I think that inconsistency is something we're likely to see moving forward into this strategy as well. We have been consulted. There was one meeting, half a day in March. There was also a targeted consultation for written input that closed this week, and we are engaged, of course, in trying to get engagement with the open consultation. But I don't know if you've actually looked at the open consultation website. It is like half anti-trans vitriol living on a Commission webpage, to which they are not reacting. I think Reclaim, you were posting about this a while ago, that the Commission is just hosting hate speech and not deleting any of it, even though a good chunk of it actually clearly does violate the terms of use of the platform, Have Your Say platform. So that feels like a bad omen for the strategy itself. If getting all of this quite nasty, negative, particularly anti-trans feedback, and the Commission is unable to say this is outside the scope of what this platform is for, and we're going to hide, delete, or move it, deprioritize, whatever strategies they happen to have for this type of thing. So yeah, we're not it's not looking great for the next strategy, but we are happy that there will be another strategy. It would certainly be worse if there were no new strategy. An empty strategy is better than nothing. In terms of political commitment, it keeps a legacy in place, sets the groundwork for a future Commission to decide to do it better. But we're not expecting a whole lot of concrete positive movement. And with the guidance that we've received from the Commission about what they expect to be in there, there's almost nothing legislative. And the legislative gaps are not filled. The parenthood recognition draft that's sort of fluffing its way around to potentially land at enhanced cooperation isn't done and doesn't cover the vast bulk of freedom of movement violations that exist. They're just carving little bits of low-hanging fruit and not really trying to take on the hard questions, and I don't think we're going to see that with this strategy either.
So I really do
Yet again, the future.
Sorry. No, I feel like I'm trapping you into this endless cycle of fortune telling. But I promise you will be able to leave this building once this is over. So I do agree that the Commission in many ways seems to be performative, and it does often respond to things that are happening in Hungary, may it be only via an Instagram post. But it often fails to respond completely to other countries. So it feels like other member states that do comparable things are just like being ignored. So it seems like the Commission is very committed to making an example out of one country, if at all, and then the rest is like, so that's not very promising. So we kind of running out of time, and we want to do a Q&A. So before we give the floor to the audience, I have two rapid fire questions, not directed at any of you, but feel free to answer if you have an answer. And I'm going to try to formulate them in a way that are not very forecasty, I promise. So I mentioned in the beginning of this section that we talked about the Commission. Its court cases is lack or existing enforcement, but what about private companies? So we know that the Commission has been like threatening to finally do something under the DSA. It's kind of happening, but also very, very slowly. In the meantime, Meta and Twitter, I'm sorry, I'm going to dead name this platform. They have basically dismantled fact-checking and content moderation. So maybe the Commission will do something, but in the meantime, do you think that social media, these big platforms, are safe spaces for members of the LGBTIQ community?
No.
Oh, that's a rapid-fire answer. Huh? But do you expect something to happen?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I think that you know, what the Commission had created in the first place, the Code of Conduct, you know, was a voluntary platform, and so it was already quite weak. And as Alessandro was saying, these are companies. They're going to do what takes them in a direction that gets them financial benefit. And at the moment, protecting the rights of LGBTI people is not financially beneficial, not in Europe and not at the global level. So it's not a space that's moving in the right direction. And it's the ultimate question is, are there institutions or governments with the ability to make a financial impact worth the while of these companies that they will change the tune? And I think we're at the beginning of this battle. You know, with the current U.S. administration being very clearly behind U.S.-based companies at the cost of everyone and their human rights. This is only just starting, and we can look at these current decisions, but also even further back with the Irish DSA enforcement decision last 18 months ago or something, and the U.S. response at that time was also under a different administration, was quite contrary to the ability to the EU to regulate social media companies.
Anything to add from your side, Esther or Alessandro?
What I hear is that whether there is a response or there is not a response is not going to depend actually on the lack of content moderation policies and the impact it has on our community, but really on the state of bilateral relations with the US and how they can be using this as a lever to negotiate. So I'm skeptical. Some days I'm skeptical. Earlier that year, they said it was a big no-no, massive no-no, never. Don't even dream about it. It's not gonna happen. And I know the paperwork is ready. So maybe, depends.
Yeah, that's good enough.
On how Trump actually reacts.
Yeah, on that, I mean, maybe I'll be a bit less negative just for one answer. So there is an ongoing investigation that the Commission is doing since mid-2024 that touches upon different points. One is fact-checking, one is the visibility of political content, and others that I do not remember very well. But so since the investigation is still ongoing, we cannot know much about the actual content of this investigation. Then I know that so a group of MEPs sent a written question to the Commission right after the Trump's election and the announce of Meta and Twitter to stop at all their fact-checking in the US. And by the way, stopping the fact-checking means that you can write, I think that gays are mentally ill. That's allowed because, you know, nobody's gonna remove that sentence. You can only, in the way that they are doing that in the US right now, another member of the social media platform can just add a community notice, but the sentence you posted remains there. And a group of MEPs asked the Commission whether these companies were still complying in the EU with the Digital Services Act, the DSA, which of course prohibits these types of practices. And to be fair to the Commission, they replied to that, they answered that written question, and they said that they will check, they will investigate based on the risk assessments submitted by the companies and other information that are in the hands of the Commission. And they concluded by saying, we will check, but this Commission has always been committed to defend the LGBTIQ plus community and will continue to do so in the next term. Then I don't believe this is actually true, but still, I mean, it's a bit better than the social media post.
At least they said something. I mean, the bar is in hell. Okay, so you heard enough from me. Now we want to hear from you. So my brilliant colleague Kezia will have a mic. If you have a question, please put your hand up. You will get the mic. Please stand up, state your name and your organization, and say your question, of course. And if your question is targeted to any of the speakers, please also say that. And once again, very kind reminder of our no hate speech policy under the code of conduct, which you can see on the wall. So please raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you. Hi, Alexandra, UNHCR. Really nice to hear all of your presentations. Thank you so much. One question maybe to Keenan on your asylum section. I'm sure you knew I was going to ask about that one. But of course, we have a new European framework. We have the pact. Everyone knows this. And it does include quite a lot of specificities on particular social groups, LGBTQI applicants. I think my question would be, in the context of, as we've said, kind of rising anti-LGBTQ sentiment in not only some European member states, but further afield, how do we reconcile bringing in LGBTQI asylum applicants into potentially difficult situations in these countries, and what kind of advocacy can we do also on the European level to improve this also with the European Union? Thanks.
Thank you. We might take one or two more questions if there's any. Yeah, I saw a hand there.
Okay. Sorry, I'm still contemplating on how to phrase it. I'm Salome, they, them. I work in the higher education sector, so it's a bit different, but still very topical and transversal, of course. Like very shortly, in your experience, more maybe sociological question, the top-down versus bottom-up progress. Have you seen in your research that progress is made when people, groups unionize and work together from the bottom up and through activism and through like CSOs, or have you seen that maybe like national legislation and more bottom-up, top-down, initiatives and progress helps trickle down into society to change mindsets and behaviors to become more inclusive and welcoming and safe? I hope that's clear. Thank you.
That's a pretty great way to put it. Thank you. Any more questions?
Thanks, Julia. If I may, I want to ask about one EU member states we haven't mentioned so far and that I have a personal interest in. Can I ask you about France? I've seen it's still in the green, but over the last years it's lost I think 15 spots in the ranking, something like this. And this goes to Keenan, but of course, if Alessandro or Esther has anything to say about France, of any sorts, I'm interested.
Okay, Keenan, please, if you already have your answers ready, then the floor is yours.
Yep, sure. First on the new pact. Yeah, it's a really good question. What do we do with people trying to flee repressive situations, landing in repressive situations? I think one sort of bright light on this is the way that Dublin seems to be working right now is not entirely in the negative with respect to LGBTI asylum seekers. They are getting affirmative Dublin decisions, which is the thing that says you have to go back to where you entered the EU, right? And then seek asylum there. I know of many cases of LGBTI people who have moved on, sought asylum in the second or third location, and succeeded in challenging the Dublin decision because of this issue. So I think Dublin, it gives us an entry point. How well that's going to continue to work with the new pact is a question for sure. The second piece is about the there's a necessity to think about the entire system in a different way, which is not going to happen. And so there are so many interconnected problems that make a conversation about LGBTI asylum seekers one where the pact is just not actually answering any questions. One of them is about safe country lists and the entire concept of safe country lists. The inconsistencies in safe country lists across EU member states, but also that a country is safe sort of yes or no, and not in a pro rata kind of way, depending on the specific exposures of LGBTI people or any other subpopulation, people with albinism, people with disabilities, it's people from religious minorities. Sort of, it's safe or no, safe or not, yes or no, and that's kind of a ridiculous idea. So we have a sort of strong effort on our side to push back against fast track procedures and the sort of safe country lists, or to encourage consideration of safe country lists in a way that accounts for varieties among different marginalized and minoritized groups, and are pushing as hard as we can on this question. But really, the discussion needs to happen at the member state level. It's not going to work at the EU level. And I think there's also a piece about working with LGBTI people and organizations in countries where people might be seeking asylum from to think about how to get people actually to safety and not into a country that's going to continue to marginalize them in the EU. There's sort of a perception of the panacea of the EU, and making sure that people know that actually you need to land in one of these 12 countries to have a potentially positive experience. And if you land in these 4, it may well be worse for you than where you are now. And that's about community and movement education more than anything else. And then on the question of what the EU can do, last bit, one of the useful pieces about the pact is about reception conditions. And that's a conversation absolutely where there are LGBTI specific related or LGBTI specific reception condition conversations that the EU can be leading and pushing member states to implement. Access to trans-specific healthcare for people on arrival, access to safe and potentially segregated housing on an opt-in basis, so people can decide if they want to stay with people from their country of origin or within a sort of segregated LGBTI reception space, and many other related questions that are all part of the EU's role, good practice exchange, et cetera, that I think people can do. Do you want me to do other ones, or do you all have a response on
Do you have a response on the first question? Either of you? No. Okay. Then maybe we can get to the second question and then back to you for France. So on the question of top down, bottom up, trickle down, do you have anything to add?
Was the question top down, bottom up, the movement? Uh, So I think I mean, from a movement perspective, the European LGBTIQ plus movement has always been quite top-down, and this has worked in some ways because it. I mean, a lot of success is for this, and for the fact that the EU acted as a way to multiply the what was happening in one state in all the others, and then often the activism and the campaign was quite top-down, or at least that's what the literature says. I was not born when this, or I was about to born. Whereas from a more institutional perspective, I do think, of course, that because I mean, in the past 5 years, the von der Leyen the first commission had a bit of a top-down approach, and I mean, the LGBTIQ plus equality strategy was quite top-down in this. I mean, much more than before, because there were some legislative proposals by the Commission, and this didn't really work, in my opinion. And I think we have to acknowledge that there are many more member states today than when the treaties were drafted, and therefore, you know, if you have the Commission and the Parliament proposing even a very progressive piece of legislation, but then you just miss one member state on board, and most of the legal bases that actually allow you to intervene on queer rights require unanimity. It's very difficult to you know, to think about a top-down approach in the policy making process. On the other hand, as we were saying before, it's also true that you know, you do not change the world with working groups, and you need legislation. So I think that on the one hand, for sure, anytime we speak about the human rights at EU level, we cannot miss to talk about the institutional structure of the EU and the fact that we need to reform the treaties, that the treaties were not meant to regulate today's European Union, and clearly, I mean, there are many systemic challenges to how the EU work or could work. And on the other hand, I also think that we should, and that's my opinion, I do not claim any expertise, we should a bit deinstitutionalize the queer movement once again. So I do think that it was very useful to, you know, this institutionalization, so this, you know, all these networks and these groups, these NGOs that do a great job on a daily basis. I mean, that's great. I'm glad we have it. But I think we also need to go a bit back to the streets and to the civil society, and to go back to the origins of the LGBTIQ plus movement, which is not just asking for you know, formal equality legislation, but it's asking for a bigger societal change. And I'm gonna conclude on that. It's because you know, there are many things that far-right governments or conservative politicians can do, from anti-propaganda laws and you know, limiting the right to protest. But there is only one thing that they cannot change, or that is very unlikely that they change, is that every person has only one vote. And so the only way through is to go back to the ordinary citizens and to the civil society.
Esther?
I actually don't have any data to back up my response. But I think, based on my experience in my family, I come from a far-right family. My two aunts went through conversion therapy, which was the state policy at the time. They were lesbians, they were caught. My grandfather sent them to conversion therapy with the phalangists. And my own parents went to demonstrations against same-sex marriage 20 years ago. Yeah, 20 years, more than 20 years ago. And for me, as a bisexual person, was terrifying. Spain has moved a lot since then, a lot. And right now, my parents will deny that they ever went. No way. They are not homophobic. They were not there. Like, it's something that I kind of dreamt about. And currently I'm doing the work I do, and they are very proud of it. So I think pushing for legislation is incredibly important. For instance, in countries like Poland, I think attitudes can change if legislation changes. At the same time, I would say, I would echo what Alexandra was saying. It is so important that we take the streets. It is so important. And that we are nice to one another. So if you are here in Brussels and you are going to attend Pride, and Mrs. Labib is in there, feel free to express your feelings about what's not happening at the moment. I think it's important, and I think both things need to go hand in hand. So activism and reclaim, we are an NGO, but like we are 3 and volunteers. So we are not like, whoa. We are driving on the basis of activism and grassroots. It's so important.
Thank you also for sharing that very personal piece of information with us. And now back to Keenan for France.
Just a very quick comment on the previous question, which is to say, I don't think I didn't see either of you there, but a couple of months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, following MCC Brussels event on gender in the parliament, they then did a conference with the Patriots on NGOs in general. Were either of you there? No. And the key argument that the Patriots were making at that moment, 6 weeks ago, so maybe they've changed their strategy, is that civil society is only civil if it is funded directly by individuals. So institutional or government funding to NGOs and civil society is gongos, all of it. And it's interesting to me to think about what how the argument that the far right are trying out overlaps with institutionalization of civil society work is passé or isn't working. It's not a fully formed thought for me now, but that's what their point was. Their point was governments and institutions should not give money to civil society because that makes it not civil society. And I'd like us to be careful about what our thinking about how change comes about looks like, because I don't think that it is only the streets. We were in the streets, and we were in the streets to get in the room. And so, yes, we belong in the streets, but we also belong in the room. And I don't want to see us give that up for some sort of idealized vision of what being in the streets was about. We were bloodied and beaten and killed in the streets, and we did that for a reason. And that's not where we want to go back to all the way, I think. France. France has dropped because it's done nothing. It's not that France has moved backwards, it's that every positive step that's happened in France has been non-legislative. The conversion practices ban barely makes it onto our map. The ban on intersex genital mutilation happened at the bioethics committee. It's non-legislative, it's barely policy. And everything else is just not happening. It's been extremely stagnant, and it's not a surprise with Macron's government, with the sort of parade of prime ministers. And with the desperate right-wingness of the Senate. The Senate has tried to take France back, and at least Macron has been able to keep that from happening to a degree. Right, there wasn't ultimately a ban on trans-specific healthcare for minors. There wasn't ultimately a repeal of access to legal gender recognition for minors, and that was pushed very heavily in the Senate late 2 years ago, early last year. So I think France is kind of hanging on, but the sort of continuity of this sort of faux centrist Macronian government is an impediment to all sorts of potential movement. I'm impressed, honestly, that under Macron's leadership, France hasn't fallen back further than it has, and hasn't lost ground that it made in historical moments, because it could easily have done just that. It could easily have gone the UK's direction, and it at least hasn't lost ground. It's just that others have gotten a lot better in the meantime, while France has kind of stagnated, fighting with itself about other issues. So, to be as brief as possible, that's my France comment.
Yeah, thank you so much. So one very, very last round. We're really out of time. So one final question, and please try to only answer in one sentence. Sorry to give you also like kind of homework or something. It's IDAHOBIT, or it's tomorrow, but let's say today is also IDAHOBIT. What final piece of advice or encouragement would you give to the people in this room and just citizens in general who want to do more to support the LGBTIQ community? One sentence. So please, if you'd like to start.
Volunteer.
That's even shorter than I expected. That's great. Thank you. Alessandro.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, be out, be there, be yourself, take the streets, volunteer. I don't know.
No, that's plenty. Yeah? That's a lot of advice in one sentence. Keenan.
Talk to your annoying uncle.
Yeah, you all go do that. No, I'm joking. Thank you. So that was our IDAHOBIT event 2025. Thank you so much to our speakers. And thank you also to the village at CEPS who supported this in no particular order. Fanny Sauvignon, Julien Libert, Dania Cassidy de Ketelare, Kezia Edguz, Martine Gianni, Davide Colombi, and Sergio Carrera. Thank you all for your support. Thank you for being here, and happy Pride. See you soon.
Please take some stickers as you head out. Yeah.